Welcome to the Traveling Healer podcast, a podcast where we interview healers, practitioners, and thought leaders in the field of healing, where we push your boundaries and beliefs in what is truly possible in healing.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Traveling Healer podcast. We've got Ernie Chu here from Florida. We're in Abadiania in Brazil.
Yes.
And we've been visiting John of God. Ernie's got some amazing stories with visiting John of God. He's been here, he's visited John of God 27 times since 2002, and not just here but around the world in various places. Ernie on his first visit in 2002 actually had a physical surgery. Most of the interventions here are non-physical, right? But yes. That one was a physical surgery on cancer. So he had benign cancer wrapped around the spine. I'll let you to talk about it more in more depth, but apparently it was inoperable, and
yes.
And then John of God removed it, and to his amazement of his doctor back home, it was gone. So yes. We'll go into that a bit more, but I think he's got some other amazing stories as well around that. And I mean, we're just having a chat before about your amazing path from being a writer for Wall Street Journal, a stockbroker, investor, serial entrepreneur, a minister, an author of a book, Soul Currency. He was also on the Oprah show for his amazing stories with John of God. So yeah, it's quite a story there. So I just thought it would be great to share what your experience was really, and what you've learnt from your time here. And I'm learning every day. I've been here for a week now, and just it's my first week here, and goodness me, yeah, it's an experience, right? Like lots of people telling me what they've experienced, and it definitely pushes your beliefs of what is possible.
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
Well, to give you an overview of what this is about, John of God has by various estimates helped more than 10 to maybe 14 million people. It's hard to tell exactly what that number is, because over the years people never really had people sign in or anything of that type. But we know roughly the number of people that have been coming the last few years. So it's between 10 million and about 14 million people. And something of this kind over the last 55 years or so, you probably haven't seen anything quite like it. It's very similar to, I guess, in scope to, Mother Teresa, or someone like Albert Schweitzer, who did the kind of work he did in Africa on a very large scale. But even places like Lourdes and Fatima and places like that, where you're looking at really, in a sense, the energy of a particular place or a vision that occurred, it certainly has that healing power, and certainly that draw from people who are looking for miracles. I would say it's on that scale, but John of God is a live medium, because he doesn't do the healing. It is the spirit beings that come through him that do the healing, and that those spirits don't really claim to do the healing either. They claim that all the healing is done by God, and the other thing is that he never charges for the healing. So you're not sitting there and expecting an admissions charge or anything of this type. It is very much like a church, and even donation boxes at the Casa are not that easy to find. They're behind a post, or they have a very small sign on it saying donations. So this work is not all about money, but really about love, about healing, about really opening up to that greater spiritual good and becoming more of that spirit being, which all of us are, but we somehow forget that that part of us is alive and well, and sometimes forgotten when we get caught up in that day-to-day busyness of life.
Yeah.
So that's how I would begin this, by looking at what it is, because most people really don't see see this. They see as well. I heard this man is got all these different entities. What do they do? Are these entities good? Or what do I need to do? I'm not sick, so I don't need to go. And when you hear about it, first of all, it's an invitation, and not everybody gets that invitation. But if you're called, you have the choice of whether you go or not.
Yeah.
And if you don't go, well, that's up to you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But many people do, and sometimes it takes something where you have some type of disease or something about you that you have to go. Often you tend to put your faith in doctors, and then you find that sometimes there's not a cure, or in my case, I didn't really know how serious a lot of the things I had were, especially that lipoma, which was a tumor that grew and grew and grew. It started out as a size of a marble, and it really didn't grow on the spine. It was away from the spine about maybe half an inch. It grew larger and larger over about 22 years, and it got so large that it started to become very noticeable when I put on a shirt.
Okay.
And also it started, instead of being very soft and pliable, it became very hard. And
Is that at the bottom of your spine, or?
it was right about an inch, or no, it's about maybe 4 inches toward the bottom of my spine.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's something that if you wanted to put your arm in back of you, you could just barely reach it if you had your arm there.
Yep,
it was right there, and I didn't really notice it, except that once in a while I could feel, as I was sitting somewhere, that I could feel it. When it became almost too late to have it removed, it was much bigger, and the doctors both in the United States and Canada indicated that it was pretty close to the spine, and potentially it could cause paralysis, and that generally speaking it was not something that they would undertake. It would have to be a specialist. Well, when I actually came to visit John of God, I came because somebody else who was a friend of mine actually was in a car accident, and it was far worse than what I had. She was actually paralyzed, both her legs and her arms, because she was thrown from the car. The car was run off the road, so it went up an embankment, hit a tree, and she was thrown out of the car, and the car actually ran her over and crushed her spine.
Wow.
Yeah. It was really very tragic, because she was only 28 years old, was in the prime of her life, a very beautiful young woman. And as a minister and friend, I came to see her the next day, and she hadn't yet realized the devastating extent of her injuries. And I told her that it's either going to be the worst thing in her life that she ever had, or the best thing. And there were some times that she thought it was going to be the worst thing that she ever had, because she couldn't move. She had to be in a wheelchair. She had to learn to exist all over again. Somehow she decided that her life hadn't ended, so she heard about John of God and came down to.
So did you know about John of God at that time, or?
I knew about the practice of what they did, which is essentially there was another healer that is called Arrigo, and he was the predecessor of John of God, but he only had one entity, which was a dead German doctor named Dr. Fritz, and he actually healed hundreds, if not tens of thousands of people, but not on the scale that John of God has done.
No.
And so when I came down, I had an understanding of that this was possible and that what people did, because the man that told me about it, he was a medical doctor himself.
Oh,
and
okay.
he had actually done a lot of work and research on parapsychology. And
had he been to visit John of God himself?
No, he hadn't.
Yeah,
I don't think John of God was on his radar screen at that time.
Yeah.
But Arrigo was, and there was actually a book written by John Fuller called Arrigo, Surgeon of the Rusty Knife, which is essentially the things that he used to do. There were a lot of films of Arrigo doing cataract surgery with a fruit knife. And of course you wouldn't want to have a fruit knife, somebody doing that. I mean, it sounds almost impossible, but here John of God is doing it with a scalpel and sometimes even a knife, a paring knife.
Seen about 3 of those.
And he's not only that, but because of the fact that this is all being done by a spirit, he doesn't even have to look at what he's doing. So you'll actually see him, and sometimes he'll be looking. He'll appear to be doing it carefully. Yeah. And other times he'll be just like looking around the room while he's doing it.
Yeah, I saw that.
And that's
incredible.
a pretty. But his hands and everything are all guided.
Yeah.
So
something you got to see to.
When you're
believe.
down here, you learn that there's another dimension of reality. That you're never alone. You may think that you're alone when you're somewhere, but there's an unseen dimension that is there. When you have a near miss on an automobile accident, when you should have really been severely injured, you say to yourself, "Boy, somebody must be watching over you," and guess what? They are.
Yeah.
And it's a little, and then you start to think, well, gee, I wouldn't do some of the things that I do in private if I knew that somebody was watching me. And that's fine too, because the other dimension is very loving, and they know what it is to be human, because many of them were human, but they're on another path, and it really is proof of the immortality of the soul. And yet there's that world that exists almost contemporaneously with the one that we think we're all by ourselves in. So just because we can't prove a lot of this or won't believe in it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Hello.
So that's in some ways that's what you learn when you're here at John of God, is you learn not only to have your own particular circumstance treated, but you learn that there's something much larger, because your brain always wonders, well, if that's the case, why didn't I know about it? And you do know about it at a certain point. Yeah. It's just rediscovering it and allowing that part of you to come out, because sometimes when it's something we can't see, feel, or touch, or even smell or chew on it, we don't think it's real. Yeah. And therefore, but the whole thing is that we forget that we're not just creatures of 5 senses. We're creatures of almost a lot more than that, and one of them is sometimes called the 6th sense, but it's more than the sixth sense, and it's you can feel and know things that you can't explain why, and that's the cosmic part of you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what did it actually feel like when you had that this physical surgery, that John of God?
You know, that's a great question, because I figured that as I was lying on the table, I would be asked that question a lot, and so I started to think about, well, what does this feel like when you're on the table? And one of the things is that I was kind of surprised, and maybe not so surprised, because I had seen other people, movies and videos that were played at the casa of other people having lipomas removed.
Yeah, I mean, like, before you say that, there's this TV on the side, and it shows previous physical surgeries as we're, in line. So you can see some incredible, I think, cancers coming out of people. Like, this guy had this massive lump on his arm, and he cuts it open, and he's just digging it out as though it's just meat, using his hands.
Yes,
and this guy's just sitting there like as though nothing's happening.
Yeah.
And it comes out like a dinner plate full
Yeah.
of whatever it was,
Yeah.
maybe probably cancer. Like it's nothing,
Yeah, and they put it on a tray, and it looks like it's,
And he shows it to everyone, in the video.
Yeah. And they usually send it to a lab to make sure that,
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
and that's what they did with mine.
Actually, before you go into how it felt, can you actually explain your whole experience, like walking in, what John of God actually did, like what he told you, or, and then, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then leading into...
I had just come down there, and I guess there's never an accident why you came down there.
Yeah.
You might convince yourself that there was one reason or another that you came down there, but you were invited, and you showed up, and you accepted the invitation. You came down there. When I showed up there, the first thing he said was, "You're a medium."
Oh, wow.
And I didn't know what a medium was, because, again, I thought he told that to everybody, but I apparently found out it's not everybody. And I really never thought of myself as being a medium. I was very intuitive. I relied a lot on my intuition.
Yep.
When I was on Wall Street, I would actually know an answer, and then I would use the tools that I was educated in, such as securities analysis and understanding finance, to justify why my decision was made. So I would go and write a report on a company, but I would first know, having been to the company, that it was going to do very well. And therefore I would start to look for reasons why it was doing well, as opposed to the other way around, which was to get all the information and then try to figure out, with all the information, whether that the company's going to be okay.
Yeah.
So
Very smart.
when somebody told me that I was a medium, it's taken me years to really understand what that was, but to their credit, the entities and the spirits have a lot of time. Time is much different on the other side. And so when I was there, he said, "Okay, you're a medium." And I went, "Okay," not really knowing what that is. And then I turned around and I showed him the lump, and he said, "Surgery tomorrow." And so that's what happened, was that that afternoon I was put in the current room. Now the current room is I'm not even sure what that was at that time, but it is a room by which really the work of the entity is supported by literally hundreds of people sitting there, lending that their energy as it really comes out of their being. And
like meditating.
like meditating, but you don't even have to do meditation, you just don't. You have to just keep from doing something else. You know, like we're having a conversation. That kind of takes energy from both of us, and even the energies around us that we can't see.
Yeah.
But if you're sitting in the current room and you're just in a way quiet, and you're not doing anything other than kind of wiggling and maybe, you're lending your energy to what he's doing, and that really helps him. But again, I say this having had more than something like. No, this would be my 17th year. So we know that yet there's a lot we don't know, but what we do know is that all this energy helps. So I was there, and essentially I was just sitting in current, and he comes over that afternoon and says, "Come here, I'd like to show you something." So he's again, he doesn't say that. He sends somebody over, and they're the translator, so they're telling me all of that.
Yeah.
And so I stand up there and I watch as he's doing an operation for a woman who was an American woman. She had a what appeared to be a lipoma about the size of maybe a grapefruit.
Oh wow.
It was very big.
Yeah.
And it had grown over the years, and she was a school teacher, had retired, and she had known about this for some time, and it had gotten bigger and bigger, and it kept her. She had made the decision that she would not have any real serious relationships with men, because when she took off her clothes and wanted to have an intimate relationship, this particular tumor was something that she was very ashamed of, and so it's really so she came down here to have it removed. And it's interesting that you used the term, it looked like a tray of meat, because that's exactly what it looked like. It was a stainless steel tray, and on it were all these slabs of the tumor, and if you looked at it, it was spread all over the tray, and it looked like the supermarket where they hadn't yet wrapped all the stuff there, but it really reminded me of a tray of meat.
Yep.
And at one point she crossed her. You're not supposed to cross your legs because of the energy. And she crossed her legs, and she could feel some pain
During the process.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And then they told her to uncross it, and eventually it went away.
So that was in a way easing you into the idea that what was going to happen with you.
Well, what was interesting was that as he was taking these out, somehow some of the tumor got flipped. So I had like a tiny bit of the tumor on my shirt. I was.
So were you literally standing right?
I was
next
literally standing pretty close to her.
Oh man.
So if I had any concerns about the operation, this was not necessarily going to ease them. So he then said, "Well, we don't have time this morning to do this. We'll do it this afternoon." So I get there this afternoon, and they call me in, and they take me outside the current room.
Yep.
And they put me on a gurney. So I'm on a gurney. Now I'm face down.
Yep.
And just kind of relaxing.
Yeah.
And I didn't know at that time that the gurney is their version of intensive care.
Oh, okay.
You probably don't know that either.
No.
If you see somebody on a gurney,
okay.
they're in intensive care.
That's a gurney, meaning a stretcher.
Well,
yeah.
Well,
it's
it's
carry people off.
It's the one that it's usually the thing that people, ambulance drivers use, and they can either raise it, or lower it, and it becomes like a stretcher.
Yeah.
So I was on one of those that was raised, and it was just sitting there in the hallway, and in one of the rooms, and not much was happening, and then all of a sudden I find he comes along. So I hear his voice, and he says something in Portuguese, where every time he goes into one of the rooms, the he sets the energy by saying a prayer in Portuguese. And he does a lot of the prayers similarly when he's doing, whether it's one person or 100 people. He'll do a prayer for the entire room, and he'll say something like, "In the name of God, I declare you all healed." And what happens here is a little bit different than what some people think, and slightly different, quite a bit different from in appearance what happens when you do a physical operation. So the first thing he does is he talks about it, and there's somebody that is with him. It turns out that somebody is a practicing doctor from Canada who is also Brazilian, so understands the Portuguese. So he went to medical school at McGill, I think, and he stayed in Canada and is a practicing doctor up there. And he decided to come to Abadiania, to there, and of course the doctors are always welcome there. And he just kind of explains what he's doing. And the doctors are, the only thing I can say is they're very, very patient. They don't want to say that this is hard to believe. But you can see that in their eyes that it goes against everything that they ever learned in medical school. and they're having a hard time trying to reconcile what they're seeing with what they learned. Well, this particular doctor, he's probably in a little bit better shape because he is Brazilian and he understands about spirits. But still, he was trained at one of the finest medical schools. And so he basically just doesn't say much, and everything's being explained to him. So what he did was he made a cut with the scalpel, and I did feel it because it felt like all of a sudden, you know how it feels when you have a it's like a long uppercut.
Yeah.
And that's what I felt. And then I kind of braced myself in case there was more pain or anything. No, nothing else except I felt a lot of tugging and pulling, and he's talking and in Portuguese, and the doctor would nod and say things, and then he would he actually took I think he actually used his hands, and the lipoma had some very soft, kind of almost disgusting fatty type of gook on it, and that was taken out. I don't know how, I can tell you, having seen the video, that he used a few of his fingers and took it out and put it out, I'm not sure where, and wiped his hands off. And then he started putting his hands in the actual opening.
Yep.
And he started using his hands to break the adhesions of what appeared to be the tumor. And so all I felt was some pushing and tugging and stuff like that. Didn't hurt at all, but I also felt there was energy. So it felt a little bit like I was having a bit of the energy of the sort of the heat of a sunburn. So it might be like a not a first degree sunburn, but maybe a second degree sunburn, a little more intense. It didn't hurt at all, but I could feel the hotness and everything going around there. And then he started, after he had put the adhesions, broke the adhesions and stuff, he took a pair of forceps and started pulling. And he would pull, and then he'd break some more of the adhesions, and he'd pull. And he finally, and again I'm doing this in hindsight, I felt a lot of tugging, and in the video, which I saw afterwards, he actually pulled out a small section of the tumor. It looked like they finally got that section freed up, and it was it was a pretty good size. It was a longer kind of size, and it looked like a little bit like pulling out a piece of it looked like a ginger root, and he was pulling that out, and it looked like, oh, we got most of it when I saw it on the video.
Yeah.
And so he cuts. Well, that was the part I felt. I felt the cut. It was like, oh, and it felt like a cut. I thought, well, since I couldn't see it, I thought maybe that's the thing. What he's taking a needle and putting it through, and I feel him putting the needle there, and it wasn't that at all. It was actually the cut of he was cutting a piece of my body, removing it. The other thing that it was interesting looking
Keep going, sorry.
at the video was that when he made the cut, what came out appeared to look like a little stream of blood, but it wasn't blood. After I looked at it, it was just a small red color, and then after that there was no blood at all.
Wow. So it's a couple of drops, maybe.
Not even a couple of drops. It was like a little tiny. It was like a spot of red, almost like red Kool-Aid that was going down my back, and then after that, nothing. And I had a friend look at it, who was a nurse.
Yeah.
And she said, in the back, the arteries are the arteries are so close to the top that even if you scratch your back really hard, you can actually get it to bleed.
Yeah.
And if you for some reason were skateboarding or something and had a bad fall, you could be pretty bloody, and your back could be all kinds of things. So she was very surprised. She said, "Where's the blood? There should be blood all over the place," and there wasn't.
So if you watch videos of on YouTube or something, or come and witness John of God, that's the theme, right? There's not much blood that comes out.
Yeah, and generally there's no anesthesia, so there's no
yeah.
infection, and generally it doesn't hurt. And in this case, there was I won't say a hurt, but it was when they cut, I could feel the pain, the brief pain of the cut, and
which is nothing compared to what exactly.
and then it went away, and it was probably just like again a sunburn.
Yeah.
And after he took the first thing out, I could feel more tugging. And I thought, well, they're probably doing something else. When I then turned around after I watched the film, he keeps pulling, and he sticks his hand in there, and they finally get to the bottom of it, and they pull out this long, what appears to be root. It's a pretty good sized piece.
Wow.
And if you looked at the entire piece, the first and the second things that he did, you could imagine a coffee cup, and the first, almost a half a coffee cup is filled up with that tumor.
Wow.
Yeah, I was pretty. It seemed pretty big, in retrospect, but most of it was below the surface. And what they told me was that it had actually not only grown below the surface, right, but part of it had wrapped around the vertebral artery. Now, you know what that is. It controls the blood supply to the legs and also to the spine. And it would have probably resulted in probably some type of, I guess medically, a hematoma, and then probably a blood clot of some type, and I wouldn't have been able to use my legs. I would have lost the feeling, and then ultimately there would probably be some type of blood clot that would have gone to the heart and ended my life. But fortunately, that never happened.
It sounds like it all worked out.
Yes.
So after all that, they cleared you?
Well, they sent the tumor to the lab.
Yep.
And like we thought, it was not malignant.
Yeah.
It was just growing in the wrong place.
Yeah.
And besides, I really didn't want to have a lot of lumps growing in different parts of my body.
Yeah.
But certainly if you had one lump growing, that was not the place you wanted it to be.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that was my first experience there.
Yep.
And to give you an idea of, the reason I talked about the when he told me I was a Casa medium, what happened was that, of course, the procedure when you have when you have a invisible, at that point they called it a surgery, but now it's called a spiritual intervention. You have to stay in your room 24 hours, not to move. You have to. So I was in my room after the, I took a taxi to the casa, and to my hotel.
Yeah.
And I had so much energy.
Really?
I felt so good.
Like straight away after?
Yeah, straight away after. And the reason is that, as you know, every 60 or 90 days, the body creates new cells. And so these new cells were being created also for this tumor. And it takes a pattern of energy to hold that into place. So you were using a lot of energy just to hold that tumor into place.
Oh, of course, yeah.
When you take the tumor out, all of a sudden that energy gets freed up.
Yeah.
And I felt so good. I felt like dancing and whatever. And
was it 24 hours for you? He said 24.
Well, yeah. And right after I was lying on the gurney, after the operation was finished, I kept thinking, wow, I feel really good. I think I'm just going to get up, And as I started to get up, the doctor who was watching this came along, and he said, "Where are you going?" He said, "The entity needs to have you lie down because it's too close to the spine. They're not gonna put any stitches in." And he doesn't put, when he calls stitches, it's like 1 or 2 stitches. I mean, it's crazy. And so I basically lay down, and then I waited for about an hour. An hour, I had a major operation, right? An hour, I get up, and I'm ready to. I'm feeling so great. I mean, I'm really ready to run to the taxi or run home. They told me I followed the rules, and I took a taxi. It wasn't very far, and it was at Pousada Luz Divina, which was at that time one of the closest. So I basically gave thanks to it. I mean, I was so happy that it was gone. I didn't really know the extent of how bad it was until afterwards. And I wasn't told by the entity, I was told by the doctor who watched it. He's a medical doctor.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah, and he explained to me, he said, later on, after the operation was finished, and before it was, he said, before they left the table, he tells the doctor to go put his hand in there and feel around, make sure he got everything. And so if you looked at the film, the doctor says, "I can't do that. I'm a doctor. My hands aren't sterile, and here I'm putting it inside an open wound. I'll get infection." And
Did
so
he do it, or?
No, he didn't do it. You could see him, just feeling around the edges of his hand.
Yeah.
It's a little bit hilarious, but it was very careful, and it was his hand that was around the edges. And finally, so I asked him, I said, "Did he get everything?" He says, "Oh yeah, he got it." And then he said to me later on, he said, "You had this big wound," and he said, "Well, it's just going to close up, and we'll just let it drain."
Wow.
And so he looks at me, and he says, "And then this big wound where you could take 3 fingers, and his fingers are pretty big, and put it in the opening. So the wound was very big, and it all starts to close by itself." And this was at the time he told me that. It was about 6 years or 7 years afterwards in Toronto, and his eyes were still like bulging. He couldn't believe he's going to remember that the rest of his life. That how this wound just like had a life of its own. It's,
Yeah, I mean,
so everything
awesome.
down here has a life of their own, and it's all we call it spiritually driven, but it's really, in a sense, the dimensions and the veils between the dimensions are so thin. This is like no kidding. And there's a lot of explanation about having been the energy of the crystals and the water and things like that. But whatever it is, this is a place that's totally unique.
Yeah.
And very few places in the world are like this.
Oh man, I've never been in a place like this. I mean, I'll be making a bit of a vlog hopefully and sharing that on YouTube, and some videos. Oh yeah, just around the town here, and just capturing snippets of the feeling here. You know.
Yep, and there are many people who have come. I mean,
Yeah.
one of the lady with the red hair that's in our group.
Yep.
This is her third time.
Mm.
She originally I met her in Toronto when I was helping the entity
Okay.
there, and again I sat in current, and I contributed to probably more than I really knew, and probably less than really I was aware. But the bottom line was that she had multiple sclerosis.
Oh, okay.
And she talked to me, and I said, you really want to go to Brazil because it's so much more intense, and if you really want healing, that's where the best thing to do is. You're not gonna your chances of being healed the way you want will be in Brazil, not here, not in Toronto for 2 days. So she went with us, and she went with us twice. And the second year, she noticed that all her symptoms were gone.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, she had to walk in a certain way, almost pigeon-toed, to keep her balance.
Wow. I mean, you wouldn't.
And she came one
you
more.
wouldn't think so.
She came one more time
Talking to it. Yeah.
to just prove that, because she was afraid that she didn't dare go to Cedars-Sinai to get a diagnosis to see that she was all clear, because she was afraid that when she did, she'd be very disappointed.
Yeah.
But she did finally,
Oh.
and they couldn't find anything. They were looking around in her brain and looking for the sclerotic tissue that
Yeah.
essentially has, and they couldn't find anything. And of course, she's had it for years, so they have a record of it. So it's not like they made a mistake. It was finally healed, and so she's here again as a way to look at other things in her life to perhaps get clarity about how to move forward.
Yeah. So cool.
Yeah, that's
No, it's all about really. I mean, the reason why I want to share this is because we're opening awareness of what is actually possible. I mean, I've said this a few times in my content, but about 6 years ago, that was when I think I was on YouTube or something, following Wayne Dyer.
yes.
Because he came to see John of God back.
Well, he actually got it over the phone.
Oh, really?
Yes,
Okay.
but he actually got a distance healing, which they don't do too much of it. So he got one, and because he was Wayne Dyer, he got
Yeah.
he got a very special one, and he had leukemia
Yeah.
at that time. And even after he passed away, they did a autopsy, and he died of a heart attack, but there was no sign of leukemia in his body.
Okay. I didn't know that. Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting. He after his operation, and after the work that he was doing, he had I think a second one. He said his heart was so open it felt like it could burst, and that he felt just lived so much with the heart, and he was actually going down and giving some of his money away to people that were less fortunate. So he was, I think, getting ready, to leave, because his lesson about just being heart-centered and feeling that love that he couldn't even express as a writer. It was almost like, well, you really got what your mission was.
Yeah.
And if you want, you can leave. You can graduate to the other side.
Yeah. Oh well, I think that's all we'll do today.
Okay, well,
that's great. Yeah, thank you
good,
so
yeah,
much
yeah.
for sharing your.
Well, I hope it wasn't
experience.
too long or,
Oh no,
or
it's
whatever.
great. It's great. I've just got an appointment now.
Yeah. Well,
But,
just what you do is you can always edit the stuff, and
Yeah. I don't think I need to. I
you
think
can
we'll
take
just keep it.
you can take snippets of it, and
Oh well, most of my interviews are about this long, so
yeah,
that's perfect. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
well, my pleasure. My pleasure. I'm very happy
And,
happy to do it, and hopefully, more people will come down. And we take groups, so it's something that if they feel like they would like to really get a full experience of
Oh yeah,
what it is.
So can people contact you to come here?
Yeah.
Oh, how do they contact you?
Well, they can go to soulcurrency.org,
Okay.
which is Soul Currency. It's SOUL currency.
Oh yeah, so you are.
Yeah, and it's a non-profit organization. We take groups, but we do it in a very special way. We have some of the best guides down here. We ourselves have enough experience that we could actually be guides. So we're actually, but we use the people from the Casa. So one of our guides used to be John of God's personal assistant.
Okay.
So we feel like if there's ever a need to get permission from the entities, and it happens to be on a Saturday, that we need to get permission for somebody to go to the waterfall or whatever, he just picks up the phone and calls them.
Yeah, great.
And very few people can do that.
Exactly. Oh, that's great. So they'll just go to the website, find your contact details on there.
Yeah,
Get hold of
yeah.
you.
We have. We're going to be running another. We run a trip for the right people. We don't take more than a dozen people.
Yeah.
And as it turns out, it's the exact right group of people. And we stay in one of the best places as you're staying here. Food's good. We have the entire new wing booked. That's probably.
and
that's probably why
this
you're
garden here is part of.
Yeah, this is amazing.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're very happy about
Yeah.
this place. We've stayed here. It's #1 rated on TripAdvisor.
Oh, it's good.
It's really very good. It's
Also, just to note, it's really it's key getting a guide to come here, because there's so much to know before you go and see John of God. There's so much you need to do after any visits you have with him, just so you get it right, because
that's right.
yeah, if you don't follow those guidelines,
As you can see, every day we have the people that we have put together, the guides, the two guides that live down here, husband and wife, and they're here, and they come over, and they each person really gets personal attention. If you're by
fantastic.
yourself, the only time you get personal attention is when somebody translates your 3 wishes, and then you don't really even know what the entity says, or the entity may say a couple of words
Portuguese.
and then kind of gesture, and you've only spent 8 seconds in front of the entity, and the guides the people that we know will tell you, but sometimes they're what they call the house guides, which means that they do it for hundreds of people. So later on, when if you find what the guide is, you go there and say, remember when I was up there, he said this and that, and of course they don't remember because they've got like
hundreds
of people
Yeah.
that have been doing that, and that's why you almost need to have, if you can afford it or if you're able to do it, and we have a group, we have an arrangement with some of these guides, so that we actually get a heavily discounted rate from them, so that it's very affordable to have the personal attention, and we think that that's really key.
Yeah.
So we have a good place to sleep and to have quiet. We have there's good food here, and we have really all the things that you need, which is personal guidance and personal attention, and so it's a very good combination.
Awesome. All right, thank you. Hey guys, thanks for watching the episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see some more, you can subscribe down below. You can also find all these episodes on iTunes and SoundCloud. If you want to check out my blog on my website, www.thetravelinghealer.com, I'll be sharing my learnings, my journey, and some interesting times, such as going to see John of God in Brazil. So if you want to check that out, that's cool. I'll put my links down for Facebook and Instagram if you want to follow me there as well. So thanks again for watching, and see you at the next one. The information on this podcast is no substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of a physician or other qualified health provider. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something that you have heard on this podcast.